My name's Ruth Darling, and I was the project coordinator for Celebrating Halton's Heritage, which was part of Halton's Borough of Culture. And today we're just going to go through a bit of background to the project, and we're going to talk about the exhibitions that took place and then the resources that Dave has created as a consequence of that. Do we just want to go around and do a few introductions so we know who everybody is? So Dave, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Dave Bixter. I'm an artist and graphic designer. I have lots of experience working with schools, doing art workshops and cross-curricular projects, and developing educational resources, such as the one we're going to be talking about today.
Steph Davis from Halton Borough Council. I was quite involved in delivering Borough of Culture Year, and I've led on this particular project, Celebrating Halton's Heritage. And I'm going to talk to you in a little bit about how we came about doing this particular resource, heritage resource.
So like I said, it's just going to be a run through a bit of information about the project and the exhibitions, and then Dave's going to go through the resources in detail with you. So I think Steph's going to do a bit of an introduction just about Celebrating Halton's Heritage.
Yeah, will do. I think it's worthwhile saying at this point that you've both done two face-to-face sessions with schools. So we have had quite a lot of schools at those sessions aware now of the resource. And I think early discussions with schools suggested that this would be better, not as lesson plans, but as a more informal resource that you could dip in and out of. And I felt then at that point that it was also very useful for non-school environments as well. It's useful for community groups other than schools as well. So just wanted to mention that at the beginning. In terms of how we got to this point, so Celebrating Halton's Heritage, as Ruth said, was a strand of Halton's Borough of Culture Year, which was in 2021. We got funding from the Lottery Heritage Fund, but the project, because of COVID and various issues, the project didn't start till well into the second half of 2021, and it ran all the way through initially to September 2022. We then got an extension which has taken us right up to this point. The project was about trades of Halton, so trades over the centuries, and we engaged with local artists and artists from other parts of the country to deliver a few strands, different exhibitions, different pieces around that. The first piece was about bleach packers, which was led by an artist called Lou Chappelle. I'm not going to go into huge detail because you'll see the resources for yourself shortly. And then we did 3 exhibitions with artists called Musson and Metallic. So they focused on the migrant and particularly worked around the West Bank area, looking at people that came into the borough to work in the chemical industry, and the social history around that. And then they did an exhibition on rope making, which was quite a strong trade at one point in Halton, making rope to support the shipping industry. And then the final piece was around cheese. So they looked at local cheese making, and worked with a farm in South Cheshire and a local history group to explore the making of cheese. And that was to highlight rural trades in the borough, because obviously Halton was very, very rural at one time. The reason this piece of work's come about that Dave's done is we had an underspend on the project, and actually we thought there were 2 pieces of work that we wanted to do as a result of that underspend. We felt that a lot of work had gone into the exhibitions and a lot of research and resource, and therefore we didn't want to lose that. So we engaged Dave to bring all that together in this particular resource so that people had access to it as a legacy on an ongoing basis. And we also have engaged someone we have a website, Heritage HQ website, and this resource that Dave's done, along with all the other pieces, the films, the images, etc., will all go onto that website, and that will sit there as an additional resource. So you'll have this particular resource, but then you'll have a broader set of images, videos, films, etc., to access on an ongoing basis. And we would hope, so for example, Halton is 50 years old next year, and there's talk about putting another HLF bid in, Heritage Lottery Fund bid in, around that. So it's hope that this resource can be added to.
Thank you very much. I've just popped the URL for our website into the chat, so it's heritagehq.org, and as Steph said, that we're going through a process of redeveloping that at the present time. There were a lot of different kind of digital assets which were created as part of the project, and that is going to be their new home once the site has been redeveloped. What I'm going to do now is talk through briefly the different exhibitions that took place, and then they will give you an idea, or they'll give you the background so you understand why the resources are the way they are when they address different parts of the borough's history. So if we start with bleach packers, as Steph said, we were focused thematically on trades and industry in Halton. That was the overarching theme for the large project, and that broke down into 3 different areas. There was the nasties, which is all about the more unsavoury, unpleasant, not very nice types of industry in Halton. So things like the chemical industry, tanning, the different chemicals and processes that they used. The second one was rural trades, things like farming, cheese making, thinking about like the pattern of a rural economy in the past. And then the third one was makers. And Halton is very well known for having makers of all types and descriptions, from watchmakers to rope makers. Obviously, leather making is another craft again. So the artists that we worked with were to be inspired by these themes, and the exhibitions obviously reflect that. The first project was working, as Steph said, with artist Lou Chappelle, who is an artist based in Liverpool. And her work, called The Bleach Packers, was inspired by historic photographs that we have of men who took on the role of bleach packers in the chemical industry from the mid-1800s onwards. Bleach packers were amongst the most highly paid workers in the chemical industry, because the job they did was an awful one. They had to go into chambers filled with chlorine gas and pack bleaching powder into casks. They had very little PPE that was provided, well, no PPE in the first instance, and they suffered from all kinds of work-related injuries and conditions. They were highly thought of because the work was so dangerous, and as I said, they were paid well for it. So there were a series of photographs of these people, of these men, because they weren't given their own PPE. They made it themselves by wrapping themselves up in cotton and paper, making their own goggles. And so the Bleach Packers project was to create an art piece that reimagined what their life and experience was like. And I think Lou Chappelle called it a Bleach Packer's dream. Her remit was to work with young people from across the borough, and she gathered together a team of local creative practitioners to do that work with her. So she worked as the artistic director, creative director, and had a vision for the project, and worked with a range of different creative practitioners and a series of local community groups. So the group she worked with included Glow, who are an LGBTQ+ group from the studio in Widnes. She worked with dance and costume students from Quantum College. She worked with the community choir and music students as well. The creatives that she worked with included a poet, a choreographer, a filmmaker, a costume designer, and a sound artist. And all of those different aspects came together to create a digital projection artwork, which was displayed out in the public realm in Runcorn Shopping City and in Tesco in Widnes, so that people could come across it, so that it wasn't an exclusive cultural experience or artwork. It was something that people would see as part of their daily life. As part of that and as part of promotion for it, there were also a number of augmented reality bleach packers which were created, which people were able to find out in the local community. And Dave will show you some visuals of that as well. So that was the bleach packers. The next 3 exhibitions we're going to talk about were by an artist duo called Musson and Retallick. And they did 1 exhibition on each of the historic trade themes that I mentioned earlier. For the nasties, they took a slightly different perspective. So the migrant is all about the people that came to Halton and specifically West Bank in Widnes to work in the chemical industry. So before the chemical industry arrived in Halton, the population was really low. It was a rural community. The chemical industry came, and so did flocks and flocks of workers from all over the UK and from further afield as well. And Musson and Retallick wanted to trace this migrancy and look at how it is reflected in local people's family stories and family histories. Migrants came from Lithuania and Poland, Wales, Scotland and Ireland and Cornwall and everywhere else seemingly. They came somewhere where living and working conditions were poor, but they came because what they were fleeing, poverty, persecution, was worse than what they were coming to. A lot of people who live in Widnes now don't realise that they have this history, and obviously immigration is a key talking point, I think it's fair to say. But often the immigration in Halton is hidden because it's people coming from European countries rather than elsewhere. So they wanted to reveal this immigration story. They were inspired by the idea of taking core samples from the ground. I think it's fair to say that the land in Halton is still a little bit contaminated by the chemical industry. If you dig down into it, you're probably going to find all layers of all sorts of things. So initially they thought they'd encourage people to dig up parts of their garden, and then thought that was probably not a very good idea. So they came up with a way that people could create their own core samples. And the idea was that the core samples would represent their family histories. So as archaeologists or geologists take a sample from the ground, and that shows the different layers of activity and events, so they wanted people to create these core samples that you can see on the screen there. People were encouraged to come to community events, one at Catalyst and one at St Mary's Church in Widnes, to write down their stories. You can see little booklets if you look closely at these trays on the right hand side. They wrote down their family story or their story of just what brought them to the event on that day. And then they created a core sample using coloured sand to represent different events and people. These core samples were then put on display as the exhibition at St Mary's. And then people could wander around, look at the booklets and find out about the family histories and the people's histories of people from Widnes and specifically of West Bank. So that's the migrant. The second exhibition by Musson and Retallick was called The Rope Walk. This one took place or was inspired by Runcorn rather than Widnes, though rope making was done on both sides of the water. They were inspired by a historic map that they found in the library, which showed, as you can see there on the bottom left-hand side, I'm going to say, the rope walk on a map, which was what is now Percival Lane in Runcorn. To make rope, you needed a long piece of land, because you would start with lots of threads of rope and then you would twist them, turn them together to create the rope. So there would have been a series of sheds in that location, and you can still go to that location today. It's still quite close to the canal. So they decided what they would like to do to engage people with the idea of that industry, that craft, was to make rope on Percival Lane with the local community. We managed to locate a historic rope making machine from Widnes, which the artists reconditioned, and then they ran a community event on Percival Lane where they made rope, showing people how that was done, and they allowed, as you can see, members of the public to come along and have a go at doing that as well and using the machine. As part of that, people were also encouraged to leave their memories and ideas and thoughts of historic trades. Those were collected on the day and subsequently, And then the imagery and the words and the ideas were printed onto calico. And that's what you can see hanging from the ropes between the two parts of the rope making machine on that bottom image there. So people could come and see the rope making machine in St Mary's, and then they could browse through the calico, which was meant to represent the sails from sail making, another key trade, and explore in a bit more of an immersive way the trades and the makers of Halton. So that's the rope walk. And the final exhibition was called the Cheese Board. This was inspired by the rural trades theme and took quite an interesting kind of detour into making cheese at the Appleby's farm, as Steph said, in South Cheshire. So this is the only remaining Cheshire cheese maker in the country. And Cheshire cheese used to be the fuel that would keep the workers going. It was an everyday food that people that worked historically in Halton would have eaten. Nowadays, it's an artisan luxury. You can buy this in very highbrow cheese shops. So simply that change, I think, is very interesting and something that Musson and Retallick were interested in. The change in the economy, the change in habits, and the impact that that's had on people's lives. So they spent a day making cheese with the Applebys. They made a film of that process, which went on display at St Mary's. The 12 of the cheeses that they made were then put on display as an exhibition within the church. They also worked with the Daresbury and District Heritage Group, who had a trip to the Appleby's cheesemaking farm. And they talked about what they knew about rural trades, and they were recorded, and these little snippets of oral history were played beneath the cheese within the exhibition. So as you wandered around the exhibition, they all played together, and you would hear this kind of murmuring sound, but as you went close to sniff or to interrogate the cheese, you would hear the oral histories individually. So those are the 4 exhibitions. So over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Ruth. That's great. Okay, so the resources start off with the introduction to those 4 exhibitions. They have, I'm just going to talk briefly about the sort of the function of the resource pack. All the contents items are linked, so you can find your way around quite quickly. And then there's a back to index button in the bottom right-hand corner, which allows you to come back to the index. It's broken up into 3 sections. So there's the section we talked about, the exhibitions, then we have the activities, and then finally the resources. The activities were designed, as Steph said, to enrich the curriculum. Through discussions with schools, we decided it wasn't worth creating really prescribed lesson plans, because obviously schools will have their lesson plans in place to a large extent. So we wanted to create something which would support the existing delivery of those plans, enrich the curriculum delivery, and provide ways of extending that and thinking about ways of displaying artworks or creating artworks from the work which is already happening. So there's a number of different activities linked to different aspects of the curriculum. So I'll just talk through those, and as we go, we'll talk about the resources that relate to them. So the first section here is about Halton community histories. There's 2 main focuses within the resources. There is the trades, the heritage trades, and we also talk about creative careers, but there's also the community histories, the stories of people, and we made a very conscious decision to make it a community history rather than family histories. It was important that we allow this to be as accessible to everyone as possible, and we're conscious of the fact that there will be certainly young people who don't have access to their family history, don't have anybody who can provide that information for them. So it was more important to place the focus on the people who they do have access to, so they can go home and talk to adults, or in schools they can talk to teachers, and it becomes about the community rather than specifically about family. We do have a few resources linked to this. So we have an interview with Jean Morris, who's a local author and historian, who's written a number of books about Halton, and certainly available in Halton libraries. So there's an interview with Jean. There are all the resources linked at the top right-hand corner, so we can click on those and it will take you directly to the resource that relates to that. So the film is linked at the bottom right-hand corner as well, so we just click on that and it takes you to the film. We then have 3 family history stories which have been provided through, that's again through contacts with Jean Morris, who did a talk after the migrant exhibition, and shared these stories, which are amazing stories about people coming to the area. So there's slightly longer than the migrant stories, which have been included here as well. So these stories are from the workshops and the community sessions that M&R took place. And as you can see, they're like little snippets, little snapshots of different family histories, and it provides another sort of like a shorter way of going into that. And each of the core samples has been provided next to that. So this activity is focused on a class discussion and talking about the difference between migration and immigration and how it's shaped the community. It provides an opportunity to increase awareness of that and look at links and similarities between previous migration and immigration and what's happening today. It's particularly interesting that a lot of the Eastern European migrants were fleeing persecution from Russia. So there's obviously clear parallels with what's happening now. So the idea that we can have history hunters and students can find out information about their community by interviewing the grown-ups at home or teachers in school. And then thinking about the way that we would present this, how would we share it? And the idea is that we could have little videos sharing this. Many schools have access to iPads. iMovie is a fantastic resource on iPads to be able to create and edit videos quite simply. I would imagine that a lot of children would be able to do that without any tuition whatsoever on that. They probably just take to it like a duck to water. There is a link here to Apple's user guide on iMovie, which they didn't see many point in sort of recreating a guide to using that when there's such a useful resource there. So that is there as well. It would be lovely to see any work created with this shared on social media. We have the hashtag Halton Community Histories. So if there's anything created on that, that would be fantastic to see shared as well. So moving on to creative careers. So the focus of trades over the centuries on the project. We've got a few resources linked to this. So there's a heritage trades timeline, which shows a selection. It's not an exhaustive list, but it is a selection of more prominent trades over the centuries and the point in time at which they became prominent. In addition to that, we have got resources based on the careers of the artists and creative practitioners who are involved in the project. I thought it was quite important to share this and have use the resource of the people and the creative people who were involved in this project and think about the balance, the change in career options which are available, and thinking about what would children have to do hundreds of years ago, what awful work would they be made to do, and now they have all kinds of things available to them, such as these creative careers. So this series of videos with the artists involved here, each film is linked at the bottom here, and in addition to that, we have got further research points. So all the artists mention either their own artwork, other artworks which inspire them, other artists who have inspired them as well. So there are links to that to provide further research. The links are sometimes to the artist's own websites, or it might be to the things like the tape gallery, other resources which are particularly good. But obviously there are other ways of exploring that as well. So this is just a starting point. So we have 5 videos of the artists involved, and then a directory of the artists as well. So you can access their website and any online content they have as well. So the activities suggested here, and they are just suggested activities as well. Obviously, there's you'll be in a better position to know how to use these resources with the groups that you're working with. The heritage trade activity is suggested to create a drawing and talk about the trades that have been throughout the centuries and what you might have had to do, and create an artwork based on that. Think about whether you're happy doing that, and think about how it makes you feel, and then think about why that is the case, and compare it to a job of what you'd like to do when they grow up. So moving on to creative writing, there are quite lots of resources which can link into this. What I've done is I've provided 3 possible uses of these to support creative writing activities. So the first one is looking at audio, using a Memory Soundbites website, which I'll show you in a second. Secondly, photography. The Bleach Packers poem repeats the phrase, look at the black and white picture. So that was something which I used as a sort of a springboard for an activity here. And finally, the film, thinking about descriptive writing and visual note-taking. So I'll just briefly go through each of these. So the audio, the Memory Soundbites, is based on the exhibition of the cheese board. So Ruth mentioned that each of the cheeses had a speaker, and it created this murmuring audio piece of lots of people sort of talking about their memories and their oral histories. And this creates a sort of replication of that.
We were shoved out in our beds 6 o'clock in the morning in a field with cows. No matter what the weather, you were out in this field.
It's about a way of life, the culture, hanging on to the history.
So the stills are from the cheese board film, and all the audio is from interviews with community members that M&R took part in as research for this exhibition. So the audio doesn't necessarily relate directly to the image. There's a deliberate sort of abstraction there. It makes it possible to create links and in creative writing. So it might be that you click on a picture of the spanner, and the audio is about something else, and then you have to sort of think about ways of creating a piece of writing which links those two. It is possible to click all of those at the same time, and they will all play at the same time. So that murmuring exists. You can recreate the atmosphere of the cheeseboard exhibition to an extent, or you can go through individually. So using that website, the example I've done for the first one is that we are shoved out of our beds at 6 o'clock in the morning in a field with cows. No matter what the weather, you're out in this field. So it's a very evocative snippet of someone's memory, and using that as a starting point, just list questions. Think about who did the shoving, what does the field look like, what's beyond the field, and what do the cows think of it all. And then going through that process of answering those questions, it generates a piece of writing, and you can use that to create a piece of writing just following that process. Process is really important. It's important in my own artwork, and when I'm working with schools. You can see it clearly in M&R's work as well. if you think about the way the migrant works, is the exhibition using the core samples and then writing a sample of your family history on that, the little book, and then it all sort of follows a narrative and follows a process that you can follow. And it's something which I think works really well when you're thinking about artworks where you can potentially be a bit stuck and think, well, I don't know what to draw or I don't know what to write. If you develop a process, then it can unlock a pathway through to creating something original. So secondly, look at the black and white picture. This is using the Halton Heritage Partnership website, which is linked in the resources. And this has a very useful search function where you can search for anything in particular by subject, objects, dates, collections, and you run the search, and it will provide you with images relating to the archive, photography and objects. Huge amount of resources available on that website. So we felt it was important to signpost schools and organisations to that website if they weren't already aware of the availability of that. So that is something which can be used for self-investigation, research, and finding images which are interesting, and then using that as a starting point for a piece of writing. So the example I provided here is a photograph of Silver Jubilee bridge of the birds flying over the top of it. So again, it's thinking about what's happening in the picture, and then in this example, we talk about what the birds thought of the noises of the trains passing on the railway bridge next door, the impact of the construction of the new bridge, as birds sought new opportunities and moved to the new bridge, and maybe moved away from their families and friends, and then the joy that they felt when they were reunited and they came back to the old bridge for special occasions. So just using those pictures as a starting point, huge amount of versatility in the resource that's available there. And then the third creative writing section is looking at descriptive writing and visual note-taking. For this example, I've used the cheeseboard film. So you can use any of the films or any of the images or any of the resources in this process. But in particular, this example, I used the cheeseboard film. I thought that I find the cheeseboard film fascinating. I find it really meditative. There's no audio, no speaking, there's no talking. It's just the process of creating cheese. It's something which I think that potentially young people might find a little bit boring or just might not understand. So looking for a way to engage with that from their perspective, I think is an important thing to do, because I think the film is a fascinating resource. So in this, I suggested that there's an alien has landed in a school and it's discovered cheese for the very first time in a canteen. Cheese doesn't exist on the home planet, so they need to find out the secret to making cheese. So the people taking part in the activity would have the responsibility, they watch the cheeseboard film, and then they need to describe the cheese making process to the alien. It was important for me that it was an alien rather than just another person, because the alien wouldn't have any preconceptions. It wouldn't know what a tractor was. It wouldn't even necessarily know what a bucket was. So you'd have to think about what the alien knows, and would you need to describe what a bucket is? So it's encouraging descriptive writing, and by putting yourself in the perspective of someone who has absolutely no clue what anything is at all, and not making any assumptions of knowledge, was a sort of an important perspective in this activity. And the technique and process that I've encouraged for this one is using sketchbooks and visual note-taking. With this, it doesn't have to be perfect. This is a drawing of a cow I did. And yes, I went to art school, and I have been working professionally as an artist for a number of years. And that is absolutely fine, because for me, that is a cow. I think most people would recognize that as a cow, hopefully, but it doesn't matter if they don't, because the importance of this note is that I know what it means. And it's taking drawing back to its most fundamental level of communication. And it's just thinking about that, if in order to communicate something, you don't necessarily have to have it perfect. Even if it's just being communicated to yourself, then that is a successful drawing. So that's the focus with this, talking about sketchbooks, rough books, books which aren't marked or assessed by teachers, by staff. It's a place where people you can express yourself and make notes without any anxiety about, am I spelling this correctly? Does this look like what I want it to look like? Because that's something which is very common when people say they can't draw. It's often because they have an expectation of what something looks like. And when they start to draw it, it doesn't always go quite to plan. It sometimes starts to go in a different direction. It looks less and less like what your expectations of the drawing are. So you get discouraged and think, well, I can't draw. So then you don't draw. So the important thing here is that there are no expectations, and there's no need to show that as well. We're very used to the idea of editing and reworking drafts when we're talking about writing. If we working particularly in schools, we'll have a story which will create a first draft, and then we'll edit it and create a second draft before a final finished piece. It's not often the way that schools work in terms of visual art. Is that the way they use sketchbooks is they will have a page in a sketchbook and do a drawing, and then that will be it. As opposed to the sketchbook being the place where you can make mistakes, you can develop ideas and produce a finished piece away from that sketchbook, using that sketchbook as a resource. So that's something I really wanted to encourage here, and it works across all subjects, all curriculum subjects. It's not just about visual art. We can use that sketchbook technique as a note-taking tool, creating a resource which you then dip into and can use across different subjects to create finished pieces of work. So that's something which I was sort of keen to explore in this descriptive writing section. So moving on, we have the augmented reality artworks. So Ruth mentioned this briefly before, that as part of the bleach packers, the augmented reality sculptures were created. And there are 7 main augmented reality sculptures around Halton, which if you click on here, it takes you to Lou Chappelle's website, where you can find each of these augmented reality sculptures on the map. Now I'm just going to briefly share a different screen. So this is a video I did of the bleach packer sculpture, which is outside at the back of the Catalyst Museum, near the new Mersey Gateway Bridge. So this is one of the original bleach packers, which was created for the bleach packer project. As part of these resources, we have placed one of these bleach packers in every school, in the grounds of every school in Halton. This can be accessed using any device that can read a QR code, so mobile phones, iPads. The resources have placed them, hopefully, in an accessible location. When creating this, I used Google Maps to view the school. One in particular, one school wasn't built at the time of creating these. It was a building site. So I hope that I've placed it in the correct location for that school. I've also put a little note on there just to say that there could have, since this was created, there could be other work happening in school grounds. So just take care in case the bleach packer has been placed somewhere that is not necessarily safe. That's something which I wanted to emphasize, that it's very easy if you're walking around with a tablet or something in front of your face, not to be completely aware of your surroundings in that situation. So the way this works is that you locate the school on the list, and then let's use this one as an example. Scan the QR code, and that will provide you with the link to the website where you can search for your bleach packer. Each of the schools has also got an aerial view of the school, which I've placed a grid reference over the top. So the plan with that is that you can use it as an introduction to map reading, talking about 4- and 6-figure grid references. I've deliberately created different between the Northings and the Eastings. So the circles and the diamonds help distinguish between the two different directions there, and hopefully will assist in understanding how grid references work. There is also at the very end of the resource a template for a overlay, which if printed onto acetate can be placed on top of any map. So obviously if the school overhead photograph within this resource, or if you're not part of the schools, not one of the schools, then you can access a aerial photograph through Google Maps or other resources, and then overlay this on top and use that for map reading activities. Oh, also left the numbers blank, so you could create your own numbering system. I've also linked this to geocaching activities. The geocaching is a global activity where you can use latitude and longitude locations, and it's like a treasure hunt. Things are stashed in various different places, so you can create very localized treasure hunts using grid references within your school, and maybe one each leads to the next grid references, and you can follow a path like that. So it's quite a nice activity which you can create that's very specific to your location. Costume design maths. This was looking in particular at Rachel Prime's costume design for bleach packers, which incorporated a lot of geometrical 3-dimensional shapes, linked to the idea of crystals and chemical processes. So this is, as opposed to a full body thing, that's suggesting we can use create a headband and develop different shapes. For example, there's a 3D net for a crystal shape there, but you can obviously create your own 3-dimensional shapes on that. So there are links here as well to different aspects. So there's the Bleach Packers blog. This is a fantastic resource that Lucia Powell has created, which documents the process of the Bleach Packers project in minute detail. And there's loads of different aspects of this which can relate to different activities and provide inspiration for different ways to take the engagement with this project. So there's a couple of links on there to different aspects of her blog there. So that's an overview of the activities. The resources are also available here. Index for the resources, which takes you through all the different resources that are linked through the activities. So there's again the film with G. Morris, different family stories, the migrant and community stories, Meet the Artist series of films, this is the poem for the Bleach Packers, which has been transcribed here. This was by Louise Fazakli working with the community and the students to develop this poem, which was part of the film, which is also linked at the top right there. So that can be accessed, clicking on that, and takes you to that Bleach Packers film. Look at the black and white picture, again relating to the Bleach Packers film, where each of these stanzas is, lots of them start off with look at the black and white picture. Halton Heritage Partnership website and their archive search. Links to the augmented reality Bleach Packers for schools. Link to the Memory Soundbite website. That's the Heritage Trades timeline. And then finally, at the end of the resource, there's all the links online films and resources gathered in one place so that we can find that easily.
Okay, well, I think that's it then, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been lovely to see everybody. And as I said, if you do make use of the resources, please do share and let us know. That would be brilliant.